Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Saya ucapkan kepada semua tetamu yang hadir. Assalamualaikum. Still 11:30, it's still in the morning. Good morning to our distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today. Now, without further ado, I'd like to give a brief introduction about the next agenda for today. It's going to be about the Statesman's Dialogue, entitled of their biography, a little bit background. So the first one is Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Abidin, ibni Tuanku Muhriz. Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain is the second son of the reigning Yang di-Pertuan Besar of Negeri Sembilan in Malaysia. Also, Tuanku Muhriz, which is Tuanku Muhriz ibni Almarhum Tuanku Munawir. He obtained his MSc in Cooperative Politics at London School of Economics and Political Science. He then worked in UK Houses of Parliament before moving to Washington DC to join the World Bank as a public sector consultant. I've heard a lot of things about Tunku Zain. I cannot wait to roast him about our topic today, but we will be focused on the youngsters when we talk as we go along this topic today. Now, our second panelist would be Yang Mulia Tunku Muhammad Taufek Tunku Mansur, on my far left over there. Now, a little bit background about Tunku Taufek, also known as Tunku Tommy, as I known here. He is one of the Kedah royal family and a grandnephew of Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra. He graduated with a diploma in arts from Gloucestershire College of Arts and Technology and has worked as production designer in the art and film production industry for the past 20 years. Now, with Tunku Taufek, we will be talking about the design of this sculpture, about how the definition, the meaning behind every moves that is shown in the Tugu Negara. Now, third panelist, I would like to introduce His Excellency Andreas Launer. He is the ambassador that had been head of the Austrian mission to Malaysia and Brunei since August 2021, if I get it correctly. As a career diplomat, he has gained a wide range of experience over the past 25 years in areas such as economics and cultural diplomacy, as well as international security policy and development. At least today, because we don't have much time anymore, Tunku Zain. Now we'll be talking about the first question here that I'm supposed to give you. It's definitely going to be about the youngsters. Now, we know that the Tugu Negara symbolizes freedom, and most of the visitors who went to Tugu Negara, they know a brief history about it. But how far, to what extent, these youngsters truly understand the meaning behind the Tugu Negara without listening to the real stories, you know, from the people who created?
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Grüß Gott, and good morning to everyone. Actually, pertama sekali saya amat terharu atas kehadiran veteran dalam Dewan ini. I think this sebab Tugu Negara ini memang untuk mereka, untuk kita memperingati mereka. So I'm very moved by the presence of the veterans here today. This monument is to commemorate the sacrifice of them and their colleagues. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. Now, to your question about what, young Malaysians and their connection with the Tugu, I think it is remarkable what we've heard today. I think in the last hour, our understanding of the Tugu Negara has been tremendously magnified. These personal stories between Tunku and the sculpture, what it means for the bilateral relationship between Malaysia and Austria and the United States. But most of all, what is particularly profound and what is particularly moving is the fact that the sculptor himself was a victim of war and of a fascist regime. And of course, the monument now for us commemorates not only the Malayan and Malaysian soldiers who fought for peace in World War II, but also against communism, right? So the story of triumph over fascism or communism or other forms of totalitarian regimes has remained out. This is the most important thing that young Malaysians need to understand today. We've just had a general election in this country. People are talking, and we had cases, right, where people were talking about provocations, people talking about racial violence, and I think this makes the story of Tugu Negara even more important today. So, coming back to young people, we need to make young people understand the story. We can do it the traditional way through exhibitions like this. We can do it through textbook. But most of all, I think we need to embrace the new technologies. We need to get this on social media. I hope, Tunku Tommy and Daniel, that you've done on this exhibition can be repackaged in all the different forms of media so that this very important story can be disseminated to young Malaysians.
I completely agree on that part. We have to reach the youngsters through the social media today because they wouldn't get the meaning if we didn't explain to them in a layman terms. They might not understand or to relate themselves with the past struggle that all of us had to go through to gain the freedom that we're having right now. Now, His Excellency, Mr. Andreas, if you can explain to us what are the things that you have planned in the future ahead to preserve the good relationship between Austria and Malaysia, other than this type of programs?
This is just, the present exhibition is just such a beautiful, symbolic project to celebrate. I think it doesn't work.
Is it working?
We always, we are about to fly to Mars, but the micros, the tech, we have still not managed the micro tech. That's worldwide, a phenomenon. But yes, no, I think that this present exhibition is a wonderful basis, right? That we show these kind of very interesting and unexpected connections, global connections, right? About an artist that connects the United States, Austria, and Malaysia. And I think just for the 60th anniversary of our diplomatic relations, this is a very good project, right? But as you rightfully said, right, we have to move on, right? This is just a start, and it's also just although we are always overwhelmed by Malaysian hospitality, so we said this is just the informal opening of the exhibition, but it's I think it's a good start we can work on, right? And so we can work on kind of shaping and expanding our cultural. Next year, so this year we are celebrating 60 years anniversary of diplomatic relations. Next year we are celebrating 60 years Austrian embassy in Malaysia. So I'm sure that we will figure out some other interesting projects to kind of to further expand our cooperation here.
Okay, looking forward to it. There must be a lot of exciting programs and activities that will be organized by the Austrian embassy. Moving on to Mr. Felix, are you feeling much better now? Yes. You're feeling much better now. Okay. Just to let you know that we are so moved by his speech just now. Each and every one of us might not get the privilege to hear the story personally from you, which was amazing. The story behind how the Tugu Negara was built and how the relationship and the history and the war, gives ideas to, channel your insight, emotions, and feelings through arts. How would you describe your relationship with your father? We want to maintain this privilege that maybe no other people outside know. How is it like? How would you describe your late father?
Well, thank you for that question, and again, thank you for having me here again today. And I would conclude in saying that the sensitivity that I feel, and just speaking of him, is from him. So, and his sensitivity was clearly in his work, and the attention of detail, and deeply emotional. And I recount numerous times seeing my father speak in interviews and could not hold his emotion, and I'm going, oh, this is where I've gotten this from. So the sensitivity that he had for the values of human rights and what's portrayed in numerous works that he's done that are on public display were particularly just for that, to try to make a way to reach the human spirit and cross boundaries that divide people. So even in all the conflict that he faced and loss, he still persevered. And so from that, I take that, as I said in the speech, to pass on that legacy.
All right, now, Tunku Tommy, we would like to dive deep on your expertise. Now we're going to be talking about the perspective on Tugu Negara from an architectural design point of view. Now we can see that every individual on the Tugu Negara signifies something. For example, different roles such as leadership, unity, strength, courage, suffering, and sacrifices. So how does the Tugu Negara inspire in terms, of its arrangement? How would you describe that in the architecture terms?
I suppose anything artistic is subjective. It depends on your interpretation of what the artist has created in order for you to get whatever you get out of it. And having such a subject, such as leadership, suffering, unity, and strength, courage, sacrifice, how do you display that? How do you convey a message of such massively sensitive topics like this in a physical manifestation? Using humans that represents the suffering is, I think, the most logical way of getting this message across. And even though we do have the controversy with the fact that in an Islamic interpretation that we should not be creating figures because it's not considered Islamically taboo. I don't think an abstract figurative representation would have done the job. I think the only way that you can bring these messages across is to show I mean, if you look at the faces, if you look at the posture, one man is holding the flag, one soldier is with a rifle and a bayonet, and the other one is with a machine gun. Every single one of these characters represents something quite different, and we've even got the man who is the soldier who's looking after the fallen compatriot, and we've actually got the two communist fallen subjects. I mean, when you're looking at the way the pride and the sense of victory that was interpreted by Tan Sri Felix de Weldon, I think it just shows what an incredibly talented, true artist who understands taking figurative bronze metal and putting it in a way that translates an incredibly difficult subject matter. And when you look at Tugu Negara, not only is it an incredible monumental piece, it is an exquisite piece of artwork and craftsmanship. This is a huge, huge figure. And for him to have crafted this and then have it forged or casted in Italy and then brought over and assembled is a monumental achievement that I don't think, even by the standards and technology that we have today, would be an easy task So my appreciation for what is on the top of the hill there, as an artist myself, I mean, I do sculpture and I do production design, and I have to create things for films and other people. Not easy. And this thing, you know, how long has it been there? And it's still in pristine, looking absolutely, even though it was bombed and then reassembled again, but it's still an exquisitely fantastic. Anyway, I could go on, but I think I should let the other panels have a chance. Thank you.
I know it's always interesting menarik sebenarnya bila kita nak dengar bagaimana sebenarnya how did the Tugu Negara was built and preserved up until today, even after it was crushed previously. Now, moving on to that, Tunku Zain, the youngsters might not know the history that the Tugu Negara was once, shattered and then reassembled again to how it is now. So how do we make sure that these youngsters can relate to this, monument, and at the same time know what the evil things that was done to the Tugu Negara to, in a way, indirectly shake our, faith as a Malaysian, our nationalism, feelings and patriotism?
Well, I think to repeat what I said earlier, right? I think the format in which we do these things matter. We've got to recognize that a lot of young Malaysians get their views, their political views, their religious views, their ideological views on TikTok, right? And Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. So we need to make sure that that packaging is right. But before that, I think we need to tell the story right. And I think this exhibition is a starting point of doing that, to tell the story of what it represents. And I mean, I think what the Tugu Negara represents in the first place, as I said earlier, is very interesting. What happened to it subsequently during the emergency and the explosion, the bombing by the communists, I think serves as another metaphor as to how when we are hit by calamity and danger and violence, it is our duty to repair it, right? And I think that is the message that needs to be repeated. To picking up on Tunku Tommy's point about the religious aspect, it's also true, absolutely, that many scholars, some people have opined that the Tugu Negara is somehow not appropriate because of this prohibition, this apparent prohibition. But I think it wasn't a problem in the 60s. Why is it a problem now? I think we need to have that discussion amongst the religious scholars that I think there is a difference between commemoration and worship, right? I think the objection is you cannot worship a statue or a picture. But no one ever suggested that. And I think Tunku Abdul Rahman himself made that point very clear. It is not a shrine or a tomb. It is there for commemoration. So I think that is one important thing that we need to revisit. And I think ultimately it needs the support of the government, right? So I'm very happy that Arkib Negara is, and Motak is here, because it shows that the government still values the Tugu Negara, still values the story of it. And I hope that at a time now when there is a risk of greater polarization, we can come round towards the important symbols of the country, and Tugu Negara has always been one. Yeah.
Even for me personally, I was from YTM. We had a lot of shootings around the Taman Tugu. There has been, I've been 8 years with RTM, and I would say every year there will be a shooting scene that will be carried out in Taman Tugu. That's how I know Taman Tugu. Before this, I know what Taman Tugu is, but I've never been there as a young person. But as I work,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Much time, but because the U.S. ambassador is here, I want to also recall that when visiting heads of state came to Malaysia, when LBJ, when Lyndon Baines Johnson came to Malaysia, his first stop was the Tugu Negara, and you had all the flags, and you had all the military honors, and that was really a symbol of, it was, I mean, I'm sure LBJ knew the link between that and Iwo Jima as well. But I'm just saying the Tugu Negara used to feature much more prominently, not only in our domestic conceptualization of our country, but also a very important tool for diplomacy as well, and strengthening foreign relations, because the Tugu Negara represented so many shared experiences with other nations. And I think that is lost, unfortunately.
And we have to strengthen it back, make it emerge again from the water. All right, now, Mr. Andreas, we would like to know, you know, Felix de Weldon's contribution to a nation is so great, so tremendous. It strengthens, obviously, the bilateral relationship between Austria and Malaysia. Now, has Austria constructed any memorial commemorating his service that can be remembered by the people, by the society?
You mean in terms of statues or memorials? No, it's not very usual in Vienna. I mean, also in Vienna, most of the public monuments are dedicated to politicians, to rulers, right? Like everywhere else.
Is it a taboo?
No,
what was the reason?
Not at all. Right?
Oh, okay.
Not at all. It's just it's just not very usual. But I think it's also important to know that Felix de Weldon, as an artist, has also, of course, he had to leave Europe, right, at the beginning of the Nazi regime. But he was not forgotten in Austria, and he also received at the beginning of the 1960s. I think it was 61. So briefly after. Felix de Weldon met Tunku Abdul Rahman for the first time. He received also a high Austrian decoration by the President of Austria, decoration for arts and sciences. So he was very much recognized also in Austria as an artist. And also this exhibition, of course, is also our expression of appreciation for Felix de Weldon, who is such an important link between Austria and Malaysia.
Okay, that's a great news to hear how Mr. Felix, in commemoration, also strengthened the relationship between Austria and Malaysia. Not to forget the United States as well. You know, thank you for being with us today. It's definitely an honor for all of us. Now, Mr. Daniel, we've spoken on the Austria part, how or what are the things that they do to commemorate your father's work, Mr. Daniel's work, Mr. Felix's work. Now, could you please share with us, in addition to his expertise, is there any other skills that you would like to share with all of us today? Talent, expertise that's your father have that can attract international attention?
Yes, my father was a recognized violinist too. He graduated from the Manchetti School of Music in Vienna. And though he didn't really participate in any public participation in terms of performance, he would play all the time in the house. So I had the privilege to hear him play. So yeah, that would be one of his very outstanding other talents. Yeah.
Do you think that artsy blood is, you know, genetically running in your body right now that compels you to still be in the arts industry and, you know, create more things for people to understand about your father's journey?
Absolutely. I tell other actors often that I have a predisposition because my father is an artist, so I naturally believe that I'm an artist. But I think that transcends to anyone can be an artist with proper training, mentorship, things like that, yes.
You ever think that your late father would have some sort of wish that he would like to carry out, to do before his passing?
Knowing him, he certainly wants to see the script that I wrote become fully produced. So, and we have a deal now, finally. So we're very excited about that, yeah.
All right, we are excited about that as well,
Yeah.
listening from you. Hoping that it's gonna, you know, be a hit one day. All right, now back to Tunku Tommy. I don't think we heard enough explanation about the architectural side of the Taman Tugu. Okay, how can the Malaysian government add more monuments that symbolize the spirit of nationalism, such as Tugu Negara, in a different location with different designs?
Well, with any public exhibition artwork, I suppose it's a social commentary that you're trying to put together a message. And in my opinion, one of the most important things is understanding the cultural origin, understanding what is the message of what it means to be a Malaysian. What would represent all the races and the origin of why we are who we are, what we are today here. And having been an independent country now for since '57, what is that dialogue that we have that we can all unanimously agree to be Malaysian means? I'm still struggling right now to actually come up with that definition that everybody can be proud of. I'm afraid to say it in so openly now. The Malaysian government creating artistic works that should be displayed to form a sort of unity. This should be the challenge of our generation today, and sculptors and painters and even performances, if we could actually come together to forge some form of united identity. I think this would be a huge achievement to be proud.
To some sort of history or situation to appreciate. For example, Tugu Negara is the soldiers, the sacrifices, their freedom. Now, moving on to the modern era, there has been a lot of demand for digital arts. There's a lot of to the previous days. We have physical museums. We go there, we see things, physical things, we read from that, and then we take photos and we leave. But now the museum has changed. How would you describe the change in the art culture, and how do we make sure all of these things still be maintained at the same time, can relate with the new generation?
Being involved with Arkib Negara, being stationed in working together with Memorial Tunku Abdul Rahman, me personally, it just shows how absolutely ignorant I am of the history and the origin of the culture that I am aware of. And having the ability to dig and get the information almost every day, my evolution of understanding is changing. And when I read the actual official history of what we are being told of what happened in the past and where our culture comes from, this needs to change every day, because new information is coming out, whether it's coming from the depths of the Malaysian archives, whether it's from what is being kept in India or what's being kept in Singapore or even in Thailand, and especially in Europe. The connections that I'm forging and on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and the discoveries that are being made changes my perception, and this should be an ongoing work, because our history and our culture is incredible, and a lot of it is still unknown. So how do I feel? We need to evolve. We need to change what we already know, and we need to keep on digging and keep finding out the truth. Yeah.
I'd love to see a digital exhibition,
that is,
involves lights and musics,
Yes.
to gather the youngsters.
See, I think absolutely with the existence of the mobile phone, and now we've got the metaverse, which is coming up, right? Imagine this platform where all this information could be put on for public access, so that students doing the research, people writing historical, perhaps films, and this information could just be put there and that anybody could just get online and it's there, digitized. The metaverse, the mobile phones, our augmented reality, creating everything in 3D because it just doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, the possibilities are endless, and I hope we take full advantage of it in creating more awareness.
Now, when we're talking about creating more awareness, Tunku Zain, do you think that our education had done enough or justice to our history to educate the youngsters about, their sacrifices to gain the freedom?
No. And
may I ask for an explanation, and what is your suggestion? That's a brief answer, is it not?
I think the alternative answer is 2 hours long. Look, the teaching of our history is to fix in this country, right? I think all of us are waiting for the cabinet. The most important new portfolio will be Minister of Education, right? I think, why do we have these problems that we have today in Malaysia? And I mean, of course, we're not alone. In many countries in the world, I'm sure the US ambassador will agree, we have the issue of young people growing up feeling polarized, feeling disenchanted, feeling excluded. So how do you create a narrative that restores the feeling of shared citizenship? You have a common future. To me, the key ingredient is education, and the key ingredient within that is history and civic education, right? Young people need to understand. For example, why do we have Dewan Rakyat? We have the judiciary. Who is the Chief Justice? Who appoints the police, chief of police? All of these things are very important because it affects their lives. And all of these things have a historical basis and historical context that needs to be understood. So if you ask me, the short answer is no. But the great thing about Tugu Negara is that it represents so much of this stuff, right? The reason why all these soldiers died for Malaya and for Malaysia is because we have our, we were creating a country, we're creating a constitution which means something, which creates the institutions. And I think in the last few days, we've seen how those institutions have worked. A lot of people were scared last week, right? And now we have stability. Now we can create a path back towards, greater unity. And, the Yang Dipertuan Agong played a role, the Majlis Raja played a role, and these are institutions that were defended by these soldiers, right? And brought to life by a sculptor who had similar experiences escaping Nazism. So it's it's very, very domestic, but it's also very, very universal. And I think we need to capture this through education. So yeah, ask me.
What should we improvise?
Later,
Could it be the history subject?
Sorry, what do you mean?
What could we improvise in the education system?
What do you mean? Well, I think, as I said.
What is your suggestion?
History and civic education. My colleagues and I at Ideas, but also many other civil society organizations are working to do. And I know that the veterans are very much involved in this because I think many Malaysian, so I'm also an honorary major in Askar Wataniah, right? So I have some, thank you, I have some exposure to talking to the veterans, right? And I think many soldiers, many of the veterans are upset, right? They can't say this, I can say this, right? Because the version of the country which they defended is also being hijacked and changed by politicians, right? So this is why we need to recapture that and fix that. So I don't want to go on and on about this stuff, but you get it.
I'd love to go on. It's getting interesting when we talk about it, is it? Okay, all right, moving again to His Excellency Mr. Andreas. How did Felix de Weldon, have the patience to complete a structure that is considered, very intricate, very difficult to implement because, it requires such careful study and work, and it had been completed according to the set period. The technology in the past is very much different from now. So how would you explain on that matter?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not an expert in sculpturing, so, the question I could possibly answer is, how did you get this inspiration for that, right? How did you develop the courage to make this really monumental artwork? And one part of the answer could also be in his cultural background, right? We must not forget that Felix de Weldon grew up in Vienna, right? A very special city, particularly in the time when he grew up, when he was born. So Vienna was the capital of the Habsburg, of the vast multicultural Habsburg Empire for over 500 years, right? And you have all over the centuries, not only always a magnet for artists and, you know, all the big art collections of the Habsburgs that we still enjoy today, but you also have this kind of this grandiose architecture in Vienna, right? The palaces, the whole city, right? It's full of I would say, a playful monumentalism, right? And big stages and of the princes, of emperors. And I think, if you think, I don't know if anybody of you has been to Vienna, but if you think of the Hofburg Palace and all these huge figures in front of the Hofburg, right? I think it's also this kind of very dramatic architecture coming from Baroque to the period of historicism in the second half of the 19th century, when Vienna also developed this Ringstraße, you know, this kind of very open concept of a growing and rising city. So I think this all inspired him also to take on these kind of great artworks. I think this is how he achieved it. This is probably a question that you should better ask to Daniel.
Yes, I'm definitely going to forward the question, Control C to Control V, to Mr. Felix. All right. Okay. Mr. Daniel, if you can share with us today, in producing a sculpture that was commissioned, does your father also need assistance, guidance, or advice from other parties to complete the sculpture within a certain period of time?
Absolutely. There were many people involved in assisting and collaborating with my father, both politically and also workmen. So he was very grateful for that assistance. So yeah, it's I mean, the Iwo Jima, the flag, well, to be correct, the Marine Corps Memorial took 9 years to make. And my father would joke in interviews that it was a big baby because hence 9 months, it was 9 years. And as it was for Tugu Negara, that it took 6.5 years. So here it was almost a decade later that it still took that amount of time to formulate the model. A lot of people don't know, too, that my father would often, especially on the larger scale monuments, he would sculpt the figures in the nude to really capture the anatomy, and then he would drape the clothing over them so it would portray through to give even more realistic portrayal. Yeah.
All right. We still have more questions for Mr. Daniel. What's the most difficult sculpture that your father had to make that is etched in your memory?
Absolutely, the Marine Corps Memorial, because there was a lot of political strife in getting it made and funded. It was initially funded by, actually it's the only bill in the history of Congress that passed with not one dissenting vote to have it made. But then the United States Marine Corps, which most of the loss took place in that part of our military in the US, they stepped forward and they took donations from the Marines to raise the money to make the monument. So it was very difficult to get it completely funded and then finished. Yeah.
All right. Now moving to Tunku Tommy. After Tugu Negara suffered damages, can the newly repaired architecture still maintain the national nature or essence of the old architecture? I mean, physically, it looks the same.
I think when it was bombed, I heard a lot of the facial, a lot of the original faces were destroyed beyond repair. And upon my research onto doing this, one of the faces was actually modeled by Tunku Ahmad Nerang, and he is immortalized on our Tugu Negara as one of the models. The integrity of the actual sculpture, the poses, and the original form, I think, has been preserved, and from my knowledge, because looking at the
it was bombarded.
There are quite a few pictures of Tugu Negara being assembled and the actual final pieces before it was destroyed by the communists.
What's your finding?
Not totally destroyed, just
Not
quite badly damaged. Yeah. So
Okay. What's important is the message behind the Tugu Negara, either way. He has been refraining himself because we have a few of panelists here. Now, Tunku, the young generation today may not be aware or interested in Tugu Negara. That was all urban and rural communities.
Yeah, well, I think to conclude, what it means, and then really tackling, the dissemination of that story through the education system, and of course for civil society, and for the embassies as well, and all of us here, to magnify and multiply and amplify that through social media and other means, exhibitions and digital exhibitions, as you say. So that's it.
All right. To maintain the spirit of the struggle, and then the sacrifice of the previous generation to the younger generation today to maintain the spirit of patriotism to the motherland as depicted by the Tugu Negara.
I think something I haven't said is more school trips. There used to be quite a lot of school trips, right, to the Tugu. I think that should be revived, and I mean, yeah, I guess add that to the list of things I've already said. Yeah.
All right. I believe that's the right thing to do, because that's how we were introduced by the Tugu Negara, with the existence of the school trips when we were young. Okay, Mr. Andreas, if you can also share with us, have you ever proposed the Felix de Weldon Monument, a tourist attraction, especially for visitors abroad, so that they will be able to recognize the sculptor of the Tugu Negara, which is Felix de Weldon, not just, about the history of the Malaysia fighting for freedom.
So the question was if how to promote the Tugu Negara as a tourist site, right? Well, I think we all agree that it's really an impressive monument, and it's one of the main Lumpur. So as also Tunku Zain explained, it was also, it used to be part of every official visit or state visit to Malaysia. And I think it could be put more into the spotlight as it's, than it is currently. And I hope that this exhibition could also make a little contribution, right, to put it more into the spotlight again, and by also telling its really amazing history, right? And telling also to younger generations this really incredible story of the genesis of the Tugu Negara. Otherwise, I have to say, so Austria, with all its cultural heritage and cultural sites, all its palaces, museums, collections, etc., we have a lot of experience in this kind of cultural tourism, and of course we would also be pleased to share this experience with the responsibles here in Malaysia, how you can also incorporate such sites into, so to say, the touristic tours and make it an attractive part of the touristic tours here in Kuala Lumpur. I think that should be quite easy.
quite easy after, even it'll be more easier even after pandemic COVID-19 pandemic. You know, people are so eager to travel. Now, I believe this is the right time for us to do the promotion.
Yes, it's the right moment to
It's
make such an initiative.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
fully agree.
Yeah, to boost the tourism,
That's
and we
right.
can put Tugu Negara as the main top priority for people abroad to come and visit Malaysia and, you know, learn more about our history. Okay, Mr. Daniel, if you can explain with us, you know, the history of your career as an art person. What would you do to see, you know, still alive in the new generation, especially?
Yes, thank you. Well, again, I refer back to the literary piece that I've written called Monumental, which is truly a biopic of my father's whole life. From when he was born, the script starts chronologically when he was born in 1907, and the movie starts when he's 6 years old, and then it sees him all the way through until 96 at his passing. And within that script, the story is very relative to what I read today, and implementing and showing human rights and liberties and things of that nature that he had to go through in order to survive, and then pass on that legacy that he earned by fighting and not giving up. So, yeah.
You know, most of the people, if they didn't read the book or watch any documentary about your late father, they might not be able to relate to the situation, you know, the hardship, the struggle that most of the people in that age to have to go through. Now, in your perspective, how are you going to make things easier for people to understand, you know, all of the struggle, the freedom, because all they knew their entire life since they were born, they had it easy. You know, I wouldn't say that everybody was born on a silver plate, not everyone, but most of us still struggle too, but we have our freedom to practice our religion, you know, to go to school, to be with our parents when we were young at least. So how are you going to make sure through your artsy bloods that was, you know, genetically passed from your father, keep on, you know, going through the new generations, the youngsters?
Well, I build on the theme here on this panel, and that is education. I think that this particular screenplay that I wrote is so educational. And parallel to that, also, there's a documentary in the works too, a 4-hour documentary on my father's life story that will really delve into real specifics in history and things of that nature. And I think that once it's produced and available, I think that it will speak for itself. It will really be in the hands of you know, cities and governments and officials to be able to implement that into the education system. So, yeah.
Now everything goes back to the education, back to square one. We have to nurture our youngsters from the education so that it will instill a sense of you know, freedom, patriotism, and nationalism on the youngsters. I agree with that. I believe Tunku Zain also agree with that. It starts with education. Now, Tunku Tommy, what recommendations can be made so that the architecture of Tugu Negara can be maintained from becoming damaged due to the changes in time? And, you know, as we speak now, weather is one of the challenges to maintain the sculpture.
Well, bronze is really the go-to material when it comes to building sculptures for outdoors, because it doesn't really corrode if it's looked after. You will get a certain darkening and a patina in bronze, and then that actually protects the layers underneath. But the recommendation of being able to maintain something like Tugu Negara is you'd have to polish it and then put a wax layer on it to stop the oxidization, because that is the main element of what will destroy it. But it's quite an inert metal, and Tan Sri Felix de Weldon knew his material, and he knew that this sculpture was going to be outdoors, and it was going to be exposed to extreme humidity and very, very strong sunshine. But you know, when you know the combination of the copper and the tin, the alloys of what is required in a tropical environment, he did his job really well because it hasn't really changed much since it was built, and that's quite a while ago. Yeah, but can I just add something else, because
go ahead,
we
go
were
ahead.
talking about technology and education. Tan Sri had a fantastic technique of, I mean, the faces, they're not smooth like our faces. It's all very dappled and it looks more like an impressionist painting. The studies of his technique and his work, unfortunately, Tugu Negara is up there, and we don't have access to it, and we cannot go near, and we cannot study in close detail. I would love to take technology and scan the entire Tugu Negara, and then we create a smaller version of it using 3D printing and have it here, so that as somebody like me who wants to study art and want to study techniques and we want to study the formation, I'm sure if you actually look at the sculpture, you'll probably even find fingerprints on it, because if I believe when you can actually see it and see how the thing was actually put together, you can actually learn a lot more from existing artwork. It's a shame that it's a little bit physically non-accessible. You can't go up close to it to have a look and make the studies. So I'd love one day to have a smaller, close-up, just human life version of the actual digitally produced Tugu Negara somewhere at Memorial Tunku Abdul Rahman, that people like me and fellow potential artists can go study up close the techniques of Tan Sri Felix de Weldon. Well,
Yeah, that's a good idea. Something that resembles the original monument for us to study.
I'd love it to be an exact replica,
Exact, yes.
because
It has to be exact.
yeah, because with 3D scanning
Yeah.
and 3D printing, you can create an exact replica, but just on a smaller scale.
But do you think it's possible for us to do it?
It just takes money.
That's what I was going to ask. That's what I was going to ask. Is it possible? We need more donations, I believe, for us to make it come true. Okay, I think we've done enough with the panel, so I would like to open the floor to all of our audience down here. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to all of our panelists from the stage here, you are welcome to do so. I believe we have microphones prepared. If you have to, it's on the left and on the right of the stage. You can stand up and pose your questions. You're welcome. Don't be afraid. They're not gonna eat you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
1 minute. I'm Tuguruzani. My question is, was Tan Sri Felix involved in the repairing of the Tugu?
All right, thank you. Is that all, Tunku Razani? All right. I think this question. Daniel, would you like to answer? Or Tunku Tawa, would you like to answer?
No, I don't think he was. There was a lecturer, an Australian lecturer that worked at the Mara Institute of Technology and Arts. If I'm not mistaken, his name was. Anyway, I can look it up and get back to you on that one. I can't remember his name, but no. Tan Sri Felix de Weldon was not involved in the actual repair of the rebuild of Tugu Negara. It was done predominantly by our local crafts people and under the supervision of an Australian arts lecturer, from what I know. Yeah.
That would suffice.
Australian. Sorry, Australian.
Do you have any more answer, probably, from Mr. Daniel? Do you have anything with regards to the question?
Well, I think he answered the question. I don't know if I can expound on it. But I mean, I do know the Marine Corps Memorial had to go through a major renovation. It took many years too, and it was very expensive. I understood it to be $5 million to renovate that sculpture, so I can only imagine Tugu Negara was maybe similar to, I don't know what year that was repaired, but yeah, it's quite a task.
Yeah, it's challenging, but all we know now, it's preserved. And do we have any more question from our beloved audience? We have microphones provided on the left and the right side. Don't be shy. You can ask anything you want. I believe our panel here would love to answer.
Sorry, I've just found his name. Christopher Carney, Australian lecturer at Murrah Institute. Yeah, Christopher Carney, C-A-R-N-E-Y.
All right, thank you, Tunku Tommy. Okay, do we have any more question? Oh, go ahead. Tolong paskan microphone.
Hello. First of all, just would like to thank all the panelists for the very insightful discussion just now. So my name is Zainab. I'm from Yayasan Tunku Abdul Rahman. I have two questions actually. So one question is about monuments. So I would like to apologize first for my lack of knowledge, I would say. But then my first question is there any other significant monuments in Malaysia, like all over Malaysia? Is there anything that, I know Tugu Negara is very, very monumental from Malaysia, but then is there any other monuments that exist in Malaysia? That is my number one question. Number two question, not exactly related about monuments, but I was quite intrigued by Tunku Zain's answer just now about appreciating the veterans in this country. So it just made me think, what are some other ways to appreciate our veterans that work so hard, that fight every day for our country? So the two part of the questions lah. Thank you so much.
So could I answer part one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Tugu Negara is actually the second national monument, well, the second monument, the first one being the cenotaph that was originally built in 1921 by the British, and it was originally in front of the railway station, which they had to move it because an overpass was built, and it was moved next to Tugu Negara right now. And this was built by the British to commemorate the fallen soldiers for World War I, if I'm not mistaken. And because after independence, Tunku Abdul Rahman felt it necessary to build a monument by a Malaysian for our Malaysian struggle. Tugu Negara was built and commissioned, but Tugu Negara is actually our second monument. Yeah, so that the center, yeah.
Probably people didn't realize that because it looks like a pillar, white pillar in front of the Taman Tugu. It was there right in front of the front gate.
And
if you were to notice,
if you look at on all four sides, there are these big bronze plates
that can be shared. And I think once you do that, you know, and all of these people are, you know, someone's grandfather or great grandfather. So I think using the family links is another way to show that, to instill that memory and that pride. So that's what I would say on that.
But how do we make sure that they feel appreciated? No, we can tell stories.
I mean, I guess it's always when you have to tell, it's about good storytelling, right? And you have to say, imagine if this didn't happen, right? Imagine if we didn't have this fight. Imagine if, many more millions were killed, right? And what that would have done to our country today. I think that's part of it.
All right, thank you. Yeah, silakan.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for all the panelists. I think we have got more in-depth of how Tugu was really be designed and founding members. I'm a veteran. My name is Lee. I think all of us here are veterans. I think the importance about the Tugu is always to one thing, there's political will. We just came back from last weekend in Penang, the Remembrance Day by the state government, organized together with the Australian Embassy. And that's to remember the fallen heroes. And the Tugu is there. And we saw all the races are there. Now, for Tugu Negara, the armed forces or the Ministry of Defense have been organizing our Remembrance Day every year. And it's a big occasion. RTM was there, everybody was there. But because of this religious taboo, and because our political masters would not dare to sort of say no to all these things, it was stopped. But we, the veterans among the non-Malays, we had it. The last few years, we had our own Remembrance Day in the Tugu, and it was attended by the Australian Embassy, the military people, New Zealand, and all those Commonwealth. And earlier this year, we had got the ASEAN countries who attended the veterans celebration, and they asked to be there at the Tugu Negara to lay wreath to our veterans. And they recognize it. Even the Indonesian military officers laid the wreath. There was no taboo, except probably for Brunei because they were so close with us. So I hope this Tugu Negara, this is something that's so symbolic for us, the military. Because not many people seem to recognize the contribution given by the military to the country. The stability of this country is because of the veterans. Some even question us that, what have you offered the veterans? There's no ROI. We have given you ROI more than enough. So I think this Tugu Negara that is so magnificent, I think I've never seen anything that's so huge. I've been to many countries, to all the Tugus, there's nothing so magnificent as what we have in this country. There's a lot of tourists that comes and visit in terms of, appreciation of what they have. They may not understand the significance, but we, the veterans, would appreciate very much that the Tugu Negara, which is something that is very valuable to all of us, the veterans, to be sort of given the extra importance by the government. Thank you.
All right. Now we've heard one of the veterans wish for us to make them feel appreciated and what we are supposed to do. Mr. Kutomi, you want to add?
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
When Tunku Abdul Rahman was sending material over to Tan Sri Felix de Weldon, he got something like 24 soldiers and police, and he insisted that the models were of every different race, and they were dressed in their uniforms. Pictures were taken, and even a complete set of the outfits, or a few sets, were sent for reference. So to me, it's not about the religion, it's about everybody who contributed to actually creating what we have today. So absolutely, the veterans must be acknowledged, and Tugu Negara, the ceremonies that used to go on for many, many years until very recently should be reinstated. And I would really like to give a big round of applause to the veterans who are here today in acknowledgement.
Yes, thank you. On this left side here. Okay, that's great.
Okay. It's okay.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and selamat sejahtera, Excellency, Your Highnesses, Mr. Daniel and also Ms. Moderator. Thank you so much for the very insightful session. My name is Daniel. I'm from Institute of Diplomacy and Foreign Relations, IDFR, an agency under Ministry of Foreign Affairs with Putra. So echoing Tunku Zain just now on how our education system right now has not done enough to which one is more profitable. On one hand, we want to go for science and technology, but on the other hand, we want to appreciate our arts and history. So my question for Tunku Zain is, how do we find the balance between these two? That's the first question. The second question, also touching on our syllabus of history, unfortunately in Malaysia, if I have the honor to talk very frankly, sometimes our history and also civic education syllabus is politicized to serve the interest until to an extent that we do not have the opportunity to study two sides of the coin. So what does it take to reform the history? Two questions for Tunku Zain. And one question for Excellency is, can you share the experience of Austria in documentation of history on how Malaysia can better document our history? Because to my knowledge, we still have a lot of important historical documents overseas that we could not take it home to Malaysia. So maybe you could share what are the efforts that Malaysia can take in order to document our history properly for the reference of future generation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel, and glad to see Wisma Putra people being frank and open and challenging, and this is what we need from all the civil servants of Malaysia. And to answer your question, the balance between history and science, I think the answer to that is to do as much as both of them as possible. I just came back from Uzbekistan, and I was visiting a secondary school in Samarkand, and they were doing algebra. And I sat with the kids and, well, you're doing algebra, that's great. And I asked them if they knew about Al-Khwarizmi. So Al-Khwarizmi is the Uzbek Muslim mathematician who basically invented algebra. And they all knew about it, right? So they all knew that this historical figure is so important to them as a people and the nation, but also developed this field of algebra, which they also take equally seriously. So I thought that was a wonderful metaphor to show that there is no contradiction between the teaching of history and the teaching of science. Both are very important. I think the problem in this country is the streaming, right? The fact that your parents have to choose, between arts and science. And I think that's a false dichotomy. Every kid should do both and see the synergies between both. And I think every doctor, every engineer, every scientist should also know about Tugu Negara. And understand what that, and I think, actually, Tommy, what you've done, you've synergized this, because you've been talking about the engineering and the, all the technology that was used to create it. I mean, yeah, and it's another great metaphor of how the use of technology and the application of science is so important to the commemoration of and the celebration of history. And then the second part of that question was. What was the second part again?
The first one was science and history, right?
Yes. So So another ingredient of that, of course, is nurturing critical thinking, right? As much as I keep saying we should improve the teaching of history, I think it's also important before that to also tell to nurture in children that what we tell you is not always the truth, right? I mean, there's not one version, right? So this is the official version of. This is rather one narrative of the history, but there are others as well. I think it's important to recognize that, right? I think once the state has a monopoly on history, that's very dangerous, right? So I think on the one hand, it's very important that we teach better history, but on the other hand, it's also to include in that the other side of things, right? So of course, when you say the teaching of history is politicized, of course, right? For a very, very long time, it's only been, the victory, I'll just say like the UMNO version of history. But then, you also have to recognize that there were left-wingers. Before UMNO, there was, the Malay socialists. Before there were the Malay radicals. Of course, I don't subscribe to that. We're here in Memorial Tunku Abdul Rahman. Of course, we are here to defend the constitution and the country and Merdeka in the vision that Tunku Abdul Rahman had. But it would be wrong to say that Tunku Abdul Rahman was the only or even the first champion of that, right? We have to remember Dato' On, right, who fought against Tunku. We have to remember, as I say, the Malay leftists before that who also fought against the British. It's important to recognize that. So as much as we want to celebrate Tunku Abdul Rahman, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there were others. And I think that's the other part of the equation, right? And they do that, again, in other countries in different ways. We have to learn that as well. Yeah, thank you.
Right now, a question to be answered by Mr. Andreas.
So thank you very much for this question. I think it's really highly interesting and actually a very fascinating question, because also in Europe, although there's the European Union, right, we are united, but I still think that how history is taught in different parts and different nations in Europe might differ quite substantially, right? Because we tend to have our own version, our own centristic, where we are at the center of of developments, which is also understandable in a certain way. But certainly, you would see, if you compare like history is taught, for instance, in Europe, that you would kind of discover quite some differences in the evaluations of the involvement of European history and developments in European history. And I think it's an important part of, coming back to your question, it's an important part of our democracies, right, also to sometimes reevaluate your own history or the narrative of your own history. And I also would like to mention in this context, also Austria. We have been mentioning a part of, a very sad chapter of the Austrian history during the Nazi occupation, right? And it took it was kind of also in Austria in the decades after the war, a very painful process to come to the conclusion, right, there were many Austrians involved in this Nazi regime, right, that you also take over responsibility what happened, to acknowledge that. It was an extremely painful but important process. But I think at the core of it, there is always an open discussion, right? There must be a painful open discussion in public to make these changes possible and to see kind of a change happening.
Okay, does that answer to your question? Are you satisfied?
Sorry, I know I keep doing this a lot, but...
No, that's okay. It's an open dialogue.
I'd like to share the fact that when I told my late father that I wanted to study art, and I wanted to do fine art, he said no. And he said, why can't you do something a little bit more, something that you can actually pay your bills with? And he wanted me to do either architecture or something that he considered I could earn a livelihood with it. I protested and I studied design. And I have to say, my brother is a mechanical engineer and graduated from Cambridge, but he's not passionate about that subject. And I studied design, and I have to say, from doing fine art painting work, I earn a very good living from it. And the conception that parents have that anything artistic, they're going to be responsible paying the bills for their children till they retire, and if you do something scientific, that you can earn a good money. This is a myth that I think has been disproven today. More people that are in the creative line probably earn more money than engineers and whatever. And a lot of, like my brother, I earn more money than him. So sorry. I just wanted to share that with you, because sometimes it's the perception that science, you get better jobs. But I think it's passion that gets you the good jobs.
I believe most of us second that opinion. Okay, now I would like to give the stage to Yang Mulia Tunku Ahmad Nurang, perhaps for a little storytelling on his personal experience being one of the model of the Tugu Negara. Oh, okay. We didn't receive the green light. Okay, never mind. Perhaps we can organize another dialogue, Datin Sri? Okay, never mind. It's okay. Any more questions? Do we have more questions? If not, we would like to wrap up our dialogue for today. All right? Yes, please.
This is obviously not karaoke, so I'll be sensible. That was a very moving and touching story you told about how your father met the Tunku and put together the statue. Now, it's obvious to me that both of you put your heart and soul into the work that you do. You in your writing, your acting, your playwriting, etc., and your father in his sculptures. Now, when you see his work, what remnants of his soul do you see in the work he's done? Because when he created these pieces, there's a story to them, there's a history to them, but also there's part of him in those sculptures. What pieces, do you get anything back from him that it says, this is my father's work?
That he got as close as he could to perfection for any observer that would look or looks at his work that I've encountered and witnessed, certainly in the United States, the Marine Corps Memorial, on more occasions than I can count, just being there and seeing people come and see the monument and then just emoting uninhibited. And so when I look at my father's work, it always inspires me, one, to not give up and to work as hard as I can of understanding the medium that I'm working on, whether it's a script or an acting role or even being a friend. But yeah, my father implemented that very strongly in his work. And it, as Tunku Tommy mentioned, if you could just see up close, it's very moving. It's almost like a fingerprint, my father's mark on all of his sculpture. So I hope that answered your question. Oh, thank you.
All right, thank you. Do you have any more questions? All right. I believe we don't, because I don't see any gesture. Any of you would like to stand up and give your question? All right, so with that, we wraps up our dialogue for today, entitled Tugu Negara, the inspiration of Yang Teramat Mulia Tunku Abdul Rahman. Thank you very much to Tunku Zain, His Excellency Andreas, and then to Daniel de Weldon and Tunku Tommy for being with us today as one of the panelists. Now I'd like to give back to the host. Silakan pengacara majlis.
Majlis mengucapkan ribuan terima kasih kepada barisan tokoh pembicara